Alright, this is a bonus video. Where does the quadratic formula come from? So we talked about how to use the quadratic formula. Why the heck does it work? How did it get here? Where did we figure out all of that x equals negative b stuff from? Well, the reason it works, or the place it came from, is just by simply completing the square. We've gone over completing the square already. I'm going to show you how you can use this general form. We will complete the square to get the quadratic formula. This is why that formula works. So we already know our steps. We divide a from both sides. So looking at this generalized form, I'm not going to put in numbers. I'm going to leave a, b, and c. I'm going to divide a from both sides. When I divide a, this a goes away and it's just x squared plus b over a times x plus c over a. 0 divided by a is still 0. So this is a fraction b over a. This is a fraction c over a. We got a out of both sides. Now we're going to subtract the constant, the one from the quadratic side. So this c over a, we're going to take it away from both sides. Now it's x squared plus b over a x equals negative c over a. Okay, again, we're just following the same exact steps as we did for completing the square. Next, we add half of b squared to both sides. Now technically this is no longer just regular b, this is b over a. So I have to add b over a, half of that, squared. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. I want b over a, but I want half of it. So I times it by a half, which actually means then, I'm just going to erase this and show you that it is simply b over 2a. Right? Half of b over a would just be 1b over 2a. This piece squared, this whole chunk squared, gets added to both sides. So b gets squared, and it's a b squared. 2a gets squared. 2a times 2a is 4a squared. So I'm actually adding 4a squared to both sides. This b over 2a, remember this is like my half of b. So right here, I've added b squared over 4a squared to both sides. There's still this negative c over a. Now when I simplify and rewrite as a binomial squared, remember this b over 2a, that's what goes here when I'm writing my binomial squared. It's x plus half of b. And half of b was technically b over a, so I have to use b over 2a. This is what's being squared to give me this. This b squared over 4ac. Before I can subtract this fraction, I need a common denominator. Now they both have a already. This one is squared. So I know that I definitely need to multiply this fraction by a and a. Top and bottom get multiplied by a, so it's an a squared. Or this a squared, I should say. This one also has a 4, so I also need to multiply by 4 on top and bottom. That way, this is now 4 times a times c on top, 4 times a, or a squared, on bottom. So here's my binomial squared. Here are my two fractions in a common denominator. So I'm going to simplify that to say b squared minus 4ac all over 4a squared. Notice at this point, here is my discriminant. I'm going to square root both sides. This side gets square rooted. This side gets square rooted, the whole thing, to get rid of this squared piece. When I do that, I just have x plus b over 2a on the left. And this whole thing, my square root, gets applied to the numerator and the denominator. The numerator, we don't really know what that is, so we're going to leave that as square root of b squared minus 4ac. For the denominator, however, square root of 4 is 2, square root of a is a. Or sorry, square root of a squared is a. So square root of just the denominator becomes 2a. Now, we have just this chunk on this side after we use the square root to get rid of the squared. X is not quite alone yet. We have to get rid of this. And remember, this is still technically a constant because A and B are usually known. So I subtract this over to this side. That way I have X alone. Now I have negative, or subtracted, B over 2A, plus or minus this whole thing over 2A. Why is this a plus or minus? Well, because this is a square root. And remember, square roots can be either positive or negative. Square root of 16 is either positive or negative 4, so plus or minus. Well, looking at these two fractions, they have a common denominator of 2a. So really, I can do this numerator, negative b, and just say positive or negative, plus or minus, this whole chunk. This is where the quadratic formula comes from. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All of that is divided by 2a. So we figured out this quadratic formula using completing the square. Now, if you have a small child hanging around, like this little baby, or even if you don't, and you just like nursery rhymes, you can remember your quadratic formula by singing the old nursery rhyme, x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, if you stop singing, this baby's going to give you a look like this and say, hey, don't stop singing. Keep singing that song. I never want you to stop that. He's going to give you a mean look if you stop singing that song. Never stop singing that song. It'll help you remember this quadratic formula.